The mahogany, paneled conference room smelled faintly of old cigars and leather-bound books. The long oval table gleamed under the chandelier, polished so well that it reflected the anxious faces gathered around it. The day had finally arrived. The reading of Harold Whitmore's will, the moment his two children had been waiting for, though with very different hearts. Ethan Whitmore, the eldest, lounged confidently in his chair. His suit was tailored, his cufflinks catching the light. He looked as though the world already belonged to him. He had inherited his father's sharp jawline, his cold eyes, and most of all, his arrogance. Across the table sat his sibling, Claire Whitmore. Unlike Ethan, she carried herself with quiet restraint. Her suit wasn't flashy, just simple navy, but her hands clenched tightly in her lap. She had spent her entire life working in the background of her father's empire, never acknowledged, never praised, but always hoping, perhaps foolishly, that one day he would see her worth. The lawyer, Mr. Langford, cleared his throat and opened the thick leather folder before him. As executor of Harold Whitmore's estate, he began. I have been entrusted to distribute his assets according to his final wishes. Claire's heart pounded in her chest. She tried to steady her breathing. This was it. Maybe, just maybe, her father had seen her efforts after all. Mr. Langford continued, his voice carrying through the room. To my son, Ethan Whitmore, I leave Whitmore Enterprises in its entirety, along with full controlling interest. Additionally, Ethan will inherit the Whitmore Family Trust, valued at $50 million. Ethan smirked, leaning back in his chair as if it were no surprise. His eyes slid toward Claire, smug and cruel, as though daring her to react. Claire's stomach dropped. Her breath caught in her throat. She blinked, waiting for the words that would follow. For her name, for her recognition. And to my daughter, Claire Whitmore, Mr. Langford went on, flipping a page, I leave my personal watch, which has been in the family for 3 generations, and a collection of letters I wrote during my travels. The silence in the room was deafening. Claire stared at the lawyer, her ears ringing. A watch. Letters. That was all her father thought she was worth. Her chest burned, tears threatening to spill, but she clenched her jaw. She would not give Ethan the satisfaction of seeing her break. Mr. Langford closed the folder. That concludes the reading. Ethan chuckled softly, the sound like a knife twisting. Well, I suppose Dad always knew who the real Whitmore heir was. Claire turned to him, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Cold, dismissive, spoken so many times before. Ethan's the smart one, Claire. You're better suited for simpler things. Her throat ached. She remembered the nights she stayed late at the office, poring over reports, catching mistakes Ethan had made, fixing them quietly so their father wouldn't notice. She remembered the deals she'd saved, the employees who whispered thanks to her in the hallways, but none of it mattered. To her father, she had never been enough. She rose slowly from her chair, fingers trembling against the table. Is that all? She asked quietly. Mr. Langford gave her a sympathetic look. I'm afraid so. Ethan's smirk widened. Don't be too sad, sis. At least you got Dad's old letters. Maybe they'll inspire you to, I don't know, finally do something worthwhile with your life. Her heart cracked at his words, but she swallowed hard and forced her expression to remain steady. She refused to let him see the storm inside her. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the room, heels echoing against the marble floor. Each step felt heavier than the last, but deep inside, buried under the humiliation, the betrayal, the heartbreak, something else stirred. A spark, a whisper. One day you'll regret this. Ethan Whitmore's reign began with fireworks. Within days of inheriting the company, he held a grand press conference. Cameras flashed as he boasted about the new era of Whitmore Enterprises. His grin stretched wide, his words dripping with arrogance. Claire watched the event on her laptop from her modest apartment, jaw clenched. She had declined the invitation to attend, knowing full well she would only be paraded as the lesser Whitmore. Still, she couldn't tear her eyes from the screen. Ethan raised a champagne glass, declaring, "Father trusted me, because he knew I was the smart one, the capable one, and I will not let him down." The crowd applauded. Investors smiled. But Claire noticed the subtle shift in the faces of some employees. The seasoned managers, the ones who had served under her father for decades. Their eyes were wary, not convinced. She closed the laptop with a sharp snap. Days turned into weeks, and the cracks began to show. Ethan treated the company like his personal playground. Lavish parties in the executive lounge, extravagant spending on innovative projects that had no strategy behind them, contracts signed recklessly, deals sealed with charm but no foresight, and in the quiet corners of the corporate world, whispers began to spread. Mr. Whitmore Jeter doesn't understand the markets. He dismissed our concerns without even reading the report. His father would never have approved this merger. Claire heard it all. Though she had been cut off, some of the employees she had once worked alongside still trusted her. They called her, sometimes late at night, their voices low and uncertain. "Claire, you won't believe what he did today. Claire, we need someone who actually understands the numbers." She listened, bitterness and vindication swirling in equal measure. She wanted to tell them she had tried. She had given her whole life to prove she was worthy. But her father had chosen Ethan. And then, one evening, as she sat in a quiet cafe downtown, nursing a cup of coffee, she wasn't alone anymore. A woman slipped into the seat across from her. She was in her 40s, elegant yet understated, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Claire recognized her immediately. Isabella Lane, one of the former senior advisors at Whitmore Enterprises. She had resigned abruptly a year before Harold's death, and no one had known why. "Claire," Isabella said softly, stirring her tea, "I've been meaning to talk to you." Claire blinked in surprise. "Why?" I don't have the company anymore." "My father made sure of that." Isabella tilted her head, studying her with an intensity that made Claire squirm. "That doesn't mean you don't have power. You just don't realize it yet." The Claire gave a bitter laugh. "Power? He left me a watch and some old letters. Ethan got everything. Ethan got the crown," Isabella said evenly. "But crowns are heavy when they sit on foolish heads." The words made Claire pause. Isabella leaned forward, her voice low but firm. "I worked for your father for 20 years. I watched him build the empire from the ground up. And let me tell you something, Claire, Ethan was never the smart one. He was the favored one." Claire's breath caught. "Your father believed in the illusion of brilliance," Isabella continued. "But brilliance without discipline is chaos. Ethan doesn't see the storm he's creating. But you see it, don't you?" Claire thought of the reports Ethan ignored, the deals he mishandled, the employees whispering into her phone late at night. She swallowed hard. "Yes, I see it." Isabella's lips curved into a faint smile. "Then maybe, Claire, it's time someone else starts preparing for the day when the cracks bring the whole crown tumbling down." For the first time in weeks, Claire felt the weight on her chest lift slightly. There, across the table, was someone who not only saw Ethan for what he was, but saw her. The humiliation from the will reading still burned, but beneath it, something else sparked to life again. Possibility. Isabella raised her tea in a quiet toast. To the overlooked, the underestimated, they never see us coming. The Claire hesitated, then lifted her coffee cup and clinked it softly against Isabella's. And deep inside, she whispered a vow: if Ethan was given the crown, I would be the storm that tears it from his head. Claire hadn't meant to meet Isabella again. After their first conversation at the cafe, she thought perhaps it had just been a fleeting kindness. An older woman comforting the girl left behind. But Isabella was not someone who appeared without purpose. A week later, Claire received an invitation. A handwritten note slipped under her apartment door. "Come to my office. There are things you need to know." Isabella. Curiosity outweighed hesitation. That evening, Claire found herself standing outside a modest glass building tucked between high rises. It wasn't flashy like Whitmore Enterprises headquarters. It was quiet, discreet. Inside, Isabella's office was lined with shelves of files, maps, and charts. Notebooks filled with scribbles lay stacked on her desk, and one wall was covered entirely with pinned documents, connected by strings of red thread. It looked less like an office and more like a war room. Claire's breath caught. "What is all this?" Isabella didn't answer immediately. Instead, she gestured for Claire to sit. "Your father built his empire on two things: vision and shadows. Everyone saw the vision. The towers, the mergers, the power. But they didn't see the shadows. I did." The Claire frowned. "Shadows?" Isabella poured them both a glass of water, her expression sharp. "Deals made with hands no one was supposed to see. Money moved through channels hidden from the board. Your father wasn't the saint the world believed." Claire's stomach twisted. She had idolized her father for so long, even when he belittled her. To hear him painted as a man of deception stung. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Ethan is walking the same path. But clumsily. He thinks arrogance will shield him. It won't." Isabella stood and walked to the wall of documents, pointing at a set of files. "He's already made 3 disastrous deals in the last month. He doesn't even realize how badly he's bleeding the company. And the sharks. They're circling." Claire leaned forward, her heart pounding. "If the company falls, everything my father built falls with it." "Exactly," Isabella said, her voice like steel. "But there's more." She opened a drawer and pulled out a worn leather folder. Inside were copies of contracts, financial reports, and, most shocking of all, letters written in Harold Whitmore's hand. Isabella slid them across the table to Claire. Claire hesitated before picking one up. The handwriting was unmistakable, her father's. "Ethan will inherit. Claire is too soft, too emotional. She does not have the mind for business. But if she ever found out the truth behind the Tokyo merger, she would never forgive me. Better to keep her in the dark." The Claire's hands trembled. She set the letter down as tears blurred her vision. "Hey, he didn't just doubt me. He deliberately hid things from me." Isabella's gaze softened. "Because he feared you. You weren't weak, Claire. You were different. You led with instinct and empathy. Qualities he dismissed as liabilities. But those are exactly what Ethan lacks. And that's why you're dangerous to him." The words pierced through Claire like lightning. For so long, she had believed her father's voice, internalized his judgments until they became her own. But now, with the evidence before her, she saw it differently. He hadn't kept her away because she was unworthy. He had kept her away because she was unpredictable. "Why are you helping me?" Claire whispered. Isabella studied her for a long moment. Then she said, "Because I gave 20 years of my life to Whitmore Enterprises. I was Harold's strategist, the ghost behind the curtain. Every victory the world applauded. I was there, whispering the path. And when Ethan began circling like a vulture, I knew the empire was doomed." She leaned closer, her eyes fierce. "But you, Claire, you can save it. And not just save it. You can take it back." Claire's pulse raced. The thought was wild, impossible, and yet it took root in her chest like fire on dry grass. Isabella's voice lowered, steady and commanding. "I'll teach you what your father never did. How to read the markets like a map. How to turn whispers into weapons. How to dismantle an empire without lifting a sword. But you have to want it. Do you?" Claire's throat tightened. She thought of Ethan's smug smile at the will reading. The way he called her worthless. She thought of her father's dismissive letters, branding her as weak. And she thought of all the employees who still called her, desperate for someone who actually cared. Her hands curled into fists. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "I want it." Isabella smiled for the first time, a real smile, not the thin, knowing smirk she usually wore. "Good. Then let's begin." Claire left Isabella's office that night carrying more than just files and secrets. She carried something she hadn't felt in years. A sense of power, and as she walked into the cool night air, the city lights reflecting in her eyes, She whispered to herself, Ethan may have the crown. But I have the truth. Revenge, Isabella said, was not fire. It was water. Fire burns bright, but too fast. She told Claire during one of their late-night sessions. It consumes everything, including you. But water is patient. It seeps into cracks, softens stone, wears down walls. By the time anyone notices, the damage is already done. The Claire carried those words with her as she began her quiet war. The first strike. The numbers. Isabella taught her how to read balance sheets, not just as numbers but as stories. And the story Ethan's books told was ugly, lavish expenditures disguised as innovative investments. Shell companies draining money. A pending merger with a tech firm that was, on closer inspection, nothing more than a hollow front destined for bankruptcy. One night, Claire anonymously leaked the financial inconsistencies to a trusted journalist she'd once helped during a charity project. Within a week, whispers hit the newspapers. Whitmore Enterprises risks major losses under new leadership. Ethan's smug press conferences suddenly turned defensive. Investors began asking questions. The second strike, the board of directors had once treated Ethan like a golden hare. But when Claire, with Isabella's careful coaching, arranged quiet meetings with two of the more skeptical members, the tide began to shift. She showed them proof of Ethan's recklessness. Copies of contracts, discrepancies in payroll, confidential emails Isabella had tucked away. One director leaned back, stunned. If this goes public, the company's stock will plummet. Claire didn't smile, but her voice was steady. Then perhaps you should start considering alternatives to Ethan's leadership. She didn't say she wanted the throne. Not yet. Isabella had warned her. Never reveal the blade until they're already bleeding. The third strike. The scandal. Ethan's arrogance was his greatest weakness. He believed himself untouchable. So when he began an affair with a well-known socialite, he flaunted it at parties, despite being married. Claire didn't want to ruin a family, but Isabella reminded her. This isn't about morality. It's about exposing him for who he is. The world forgives mistakes. It does not forgive hypocrisy. The photographs were released to the press quietly, anonymously. Overnight, Ethan's carefully constructed image as a visionary businessman and family man crumbled. His wife filed for divorce. Investors panicked. The employees whispered louder now, not admiration, but disgust. The transformation. While Ethan drowned in scandals, Claire transformed. Under Isabella's mentorship, she grew sharper, more confident. She learned to negotiate deals in whispers over coffee, to sway allies with both logic and empathy. People who had once overlooked her began to see her differently. She listens. She understands the numbers and the people. She's not like her father or her brother. Claire began attracting allies without even asking. For the first time in her life, she wasn't the shadow in the room. She was the storm gathering outside the window. The breaking point. It all came to a head at the quarterly board meeting. Ethan strutted into the boardroom, still clinging to his arrogance, though the circles under his eyes betrayed sleepless nights. He launched into a presentation filled with flashy slides and hollow promises. Halfway through, one director interrupted. Mr. Whitmore, can you explain the $20 million discrepancy in the Hong Kong accounts? Ethan faltered. That's a temporary miscalculation. Another director cut in. And what about the pending lawsuits regarding the collapsed merger? Murmurs filled the room. Ethan's confidence crumbled. Then, the door opened. Claire stepped inside. She wasn't supposed to be there. At least not officially. But Isabella had made sure word reached the board that Claire had information worth hearing. The room fell silent. Ethan's face twisted. What are you doing here? The Claire lifted a folder and set it on the table, her voice calm but cutting. Cleaning up your mess. One by one, she laid out documents, proof of his mismanagement, his scandals, his incompetence. Every page was a nail in his coffin. The board members exchanged looks. Some nodded, others whispered. Ethan sputtered, his voice rising, but the more he spoke, the more desperate he sounded. Finally, One director spoke the words Claire had been waiting to hear. Perhaps it's time we consider new leadership. The silent victory Claire didn't gloat. She didn't need to. She walked out of that boardroom with her head held high, Isabella by her side. Behind her, Ethan's voice echoed in rage, but it no longer mattered. The tide had turned. Outside, on the steps of Whitmore Enterprises, Claire paused and looked up at the glass tower that had once seemed unreachable. Her father had called Ethan the smart one. He had dismissed her as too soft. But now Ethan was crumbling, and she was rising. And for the first time, Claire felt it deep in her bones. Revenge wasn't about destroying someone else. It was about reclaiming yourself. The empire her father had built stood trembling, like a grand tower riddled with cracks. And Ethan Whitmore, once crowned as heir, was now its greatest liability. The news broke within days of the board meeting. Whitmore Enterprises in crisis. CEO under fire. Ethan Whitmore faces mismanagement allegations. Investors call for leadership change. Ethan tried to fight back. Through interviews, public appearances, and desperate promises, but each move only exposed more weakness. He stammered where once he smirked, lashed out where once he charmed. Behind closed doors, shareholders whispered the same question. If not Ethan, then who? And quietly, steadily, the answer began to form on their lips. Claire Whitmore. The gathering storm. Claire didn't rush. She remembered Isabella's lessons. Patience is power. Strike too soon, and you look hungry. Strike too late, and you look weak. So she let the tide carry her forward. She continued meeting with allies, not in boardrooms but in quiet cafes, private offices, and late-night calls. She listened, she empathized, and she showed them something Ethan never could. Competence rooted in care. She knows the company's foundations. One investor remarked. She actually understands the numbers, said another. She doesn't just want the throne. She wants the company to survive. By the time a formal vote was called, Claire didn't need to campaign. The decision was already made in the silence of their minds. The showdown, the final board session, was the end of Ethan's reign. He stormed into the room, his tie crooked, his face pale with fury. This is absurd. You can't replace me. Father wanted me. I'm the rightful heir. Claire sat across the table, composed, wearing the navy suit she'd worn the day of the will reading. But now, it looked different on her, like armor, not resignation. She met Ethan's wild eyes calmly. Father gave you the crown. But you've proven you can't carry it. The chairman cleared his throat. The board has reached a decision. Effective immediately, Ethan Whitmore is removed as CEO. Ethan's face drained of color. You can't do this? This is my company? No, Claire said softly, her voice steady but cutting through the room like a blade. It's the company our father built. And I'm going to be the one to save it from you. The vote was unanimous. The throne. Later that evening, Claire stood in her father's old office. The leather chair loomed behind the massive oak desk. The city skyline glowed outside the window, the same view Harold Whitmore had gazed upon while dismissing her as too soft. Her hands trembled as she touched the back of the chair. She had imagined this moment so many times, and yet now that it was here, it felt surreal. Isabella entered quietly, her presence steady as always. It's yours now. Claire turned, searching the older woman's face. Do you think I can do this? Really do it? Isabella smiled faintly. You already have. Taking the throne is one thing. Earning it, that's something Ethan never understood. But you've already earned it. Claire lowered herself into the chair. The leather creaked under her weight. For the first time, she wasn't a shadow at the table. She was the one at the head of it. She thought of her father's letters, calling her weak. She thought of Ethan's cruel laughter. She thought of every dismissal, every betrayal. And then she thought of the employees who believed in her, the allies who chose her, and the quiet strength she had found within herself. Her lips curved into a small but resolute smile. This isn't revenge anymore, she whispered, almost to herself. This is justice. Ethan's last sight across the city, Ethan watched the news unfold. Reporters hailed Claire as the unexpected savior. The quiet Whitmore who rose from the shadows. His phone buzzed with calls he no longer answered. His mansion, once filled with laughter and parties, felt hollow. For the first time in his life, Ethan realized the bitter truth. He had been given everything. And she had earned everything. The crown restored the next morning, Claire walked into the lobby of Whitmore Enterprises. Employees turned as she passed, first in silence, then in applause. Not the forced applause given to Ethan, but something genuine, something real. Claire lifted her chin, her step steady. Her father had said Ethan was the smart one. But in the end, it wasn't brilliance or favoritism that built an empire. It was resilience, it was vision. It was her. And now, finally, the throne was reclaimed.